Welcome into Inside Carolina's press coverage. I'm Tommy Ashley. We are sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. That is Evan Rogers in the middle. That is Jeremiah Holloway on the end. Adam Smith on the DL, on the IR, that they call it now. He will not be with us tonight. I think, didn't he miss last week too? And it was John Bowman in my place too. No, not last week, 2 weeks ago. So Adam, we need you back in here. We need some stories, but get well, my friend. Title of this show is What's Next for North Carolina basketball. A lot going on. Great column by Greg Barnes on Inside Carolina about new arena possibilities. We can talk about that. GM talk. We can talk about that. Game talk, actually. But let's ask Hubert Davis what's next for Hubert Davis. Let's see what he had to say.
Only work that needs to be done is preparation for our game on Saturday. I don't look down the line, the remainder of the season. I just think that's a waste of time. I think what is in front of you is our next game, and our next game is Saturday at Syracuse. And so, that game deserves and will get our full attention because that's the next game in front of us. And after that, we'll move on to the next game. And that's always been my communication with the team, and that's what my communication will be with the team moving forward.
Thanks, Hubert.
Guys, that's great coach speak. You're looking forward to the next game. Jeremiah, I'll come to you first, but there's a lot of things that need fixing for North Carolina basketball. Hubert looks like he's aged 10, 15 years in the past 4 that he's been here. The difference, and I understand the stress and the pressure, but the way Carolina came out on Monday night against Clemson, and now they travel to Syracuse, who's not great, but they're decent. What is next for this team, Jeremiah? Where does this team go from here? And I'm not talking about the NCAA tournament, or Evan can talk about other tournaments. At what point do they find out who they really are, or do we already know, Jeremiah?
Yeah, if we start looking beyond this year, right, barring any, ACC tournament run or just whatever you want to say, right? Let's just say the state of the program. I think one thing that's going to be key, as soon as this whole thing wraps up, immediately you need to start looking at, maybe even right now. I know they're saying, in the press conferences, you take it one game at a time and just do what's in front of you. But I don't know if it's too early to start looking at, just potential team needs. I know you can't put specific players on there because you don't actually know who hits the portal, who's going to whatever, but just start looking at the way in which you'd like to run the offense, or maybe even the way in which you want a defense to look like, and just go ahead and start marking down just prototype, types of players, like size, play style, just whatever type of players. I think the thing that worked for the 24 team that obviously won the ACC regular season was you had players that played in defined roles, and were they the most talented team in the country? Maybe they weren't number one, but they were a 1 seed. I mean, they were one of the best teams in college basketball, and obviously lost to a high scoring, Alabama team. I think you got to find ways to just, and sometimes portal it's hit or miss. Maybe it's not a slam dunk every time, but just I think going in there, with the goals of which types of players to find, and honing in on those specific guys. I mean, that's the first thing I think of. Another thing I think of too is just what are the internal changes that needs to be made, because obviously if you missed the tournament 2 times in 3 years, some people say twice in 4 years. Let's just the last 3 years. Anytime that happens anywhere, not just North Carolina, but anywhere, it's like, all right, well, what's not working? Is it a player within the program? Is it a coach? What is it? So you have to start just figuring those things out. And I mostly say that just as a matter of fit. One thing that's important for any program, in my opinion, is you just have to get guys in there that match the vision of who's running it, and then you also have to look at that specific vision and say, is this something that can help us win? So like I said, I mean, lightning doesn't always strike, twice, as far as what that 24 team was able to do. But this is a UNC team that I think needs to, really honestly, starting now, I know that can be hard to do, but really start buckling down on what they want next year to look like, because it is a do or die situation for a number of reasons.
Absolutely. Evan, get in here on the players. What's next? I tell you what, Seth Trimble, he's getting right opinionated. I don't blame him. I think, I think that needs to happen in the locker room. I assume it has. It needs to happen on the court. But his post game comments are interesting. It's not something you usually hear from North Carolina players. And you contrast that with how Hubert is so overly not going to say anything negative. One thing Hubert doesn't do is he doesn't take much responsibility for the product on the field, at least in press conferences. And that's a different approach from other coaches, Roy, Dean, and around the country. But Evan, from a player perspective, I mean, you want to win, but you also want to put some good tape out there. And Monday night was not good tape for nearly anyone. So how do you approach it as a player?
I mean, it depends on who you are, first off. I mean, that's obvious. I mean, if you're a guy like RJ Davis, who these are, potentially your last at least seven regular season games, who knows how many they play in the ACC tournament and beyond that. Obviously, you're going to have a different approach from a guy like, I don't know, maybe Seth Trimble, who in all likelihood will be playing college basketball next year. When you're looking at it from a player perspective, I think you can kind of tell there's clearly, you mentioned the Seth Trimble remarks after the Clemson game, and it's been a trend over the last couple of losses. You can tell there's quite clearly a disconnect in that locker room amongst players. I don't think I'm breaking news by saying that, and you can see it on the court. There's disconnect, whether it's during the play, during dead balls, when someone's frustrated with someone else. There's not a cohesive unity amongst these players, which I think was something Jeremiah had mentioned about last year's team. I think what really made last year's team click was the role definition and just the overall cohesiveness that you saw them play with, especially when they hit their stride kind of there in that run when they started, was it 9-0, 10-0 in the ACC and beyond that. But then from like a coach's perspective, looking at the players, I think Jeremiah's right. I think these last 7 games you can use to figure out, who do you want to have back? Who are you going to try to get to come back? I mean, let's lay it out. They have 7 games left in the regular season. The Duke game obviously is a quality opportunity, and that's really about it. I mean, if UNC goes 7-0, are they in the tournament?
Yes.
I don't know. I don't know if they are. I think UNC's
if they go 7-0, they'll be. If they beat Duke and go 6-1 and beat Duke, they're gonna squeeze in that tournament. They might be in Dayton, but anyway.
I don't know if you can put a team that's 2-10 in quad 1 into the NCAA tournament. I think it would heavily depend on the state of the bubble, because this year the committee is going to have an extremely difficult responsibility figuring out how to handle the SEC. And I know people are going to roll their eyes at this. The SEC is generally one of, if not the best conferences we've seen in modern college basketball. I mean, there are teams that are going to have losing records in the SEC that should get into the tournament, and you're going to be compared against teams who finished 4th and 5th in, the ACC or, another power conference. I mean, to put in perspective, South Carolina is winless in the SEC. South Carolina beat Clemson.
Were you there for that debate at press conference on Monday, the football press conference? Like, where would South Carolina be in the ACC?
Exactly. I mean, so that's the thing where, like, if UNC wins out, I think they're definitely, like, putting themselves into, like, a good spot on the bubble. But, I mean, I could see a world where UNC wins out and they still need to win a game or two in the ACC tournament to really feel good about themselves. And that just becomes a product of, I think right now it's either 4 or 5 of these last 7 are quad 4 or quad 3 games. And I mean, put it bluntly, quad 3, quad 4, they don't matter. I mean, you have to win the game, but it doesn't matter how you win them. Like, they're not going to help you at all. The game against Syracuse on Saturday, UNC could win that game by 30. It's not going to move the needle one bit. One bit? I mean, that's just the reality of it. So from a player perspective, I think this is a time where certain individuals, certain players who, whether they have a goal in mind, whether that's trying to get to the NBA next year, whether it's trying to earn a starting spot on a team like UNC next year, whether it's trying to earn a starting spot in another program next year. I mean, these last 7 games are an opportunity for all of those types of goals and achievements to be achieved. The issue is I just think there's quite clearly a disconnect within that locker room amongst the players. And I don't know how that's going to play itself out in these last, couple games of the regular season. And I mean, I could see a world where, if I were to ask you right now, I have 7 games left, what do you think they would go? Just general record prediction. I know this is super early into the show, but what would you guys guess?
I'd say 3-4.
I was going to say maybe like 4-3 probably.
Yeah, I was going to say 3-4 and 3, 5-2 maybe. I mean, and this is considering it's against the bottom of the ACC. But the reason why we're coming up with these record prediction is even in the wins this year, what is one thing that UNC in those wins has hung its hat on, or it's been their identity? I can't think of one. You can't think of one. I mean, what did UNC do really well in the Notre Dame game that I replicated in the Boston College win, that I replicated in the NC State win? There's literally nothing. You can't think of a thing with this team, and that just comes back to the disconnect, the issues with the roster construction, which obviously everyone has hit on by now a million times and everyone's well aware of. So yeah, I mean these last 7 games for the players, if you want to take it in a direction of focus on your own personal agenda and try to get to the best spot going into next year, maybe that lifts up the overall play of the entire team. It very well could. But at this point in the season, there's really slim pickings in terms of the general overall outlook, I guess, for the team in itself, at least for this break.
Yeah, I agree that. They're not going 7-0. There is virtually no shot. Jeremiah, one thing about the disconnect, and I thought this was glaring, and I don't like to look so far back because it was Monday, but I think it is something to watch for on Saturday for sure. Those guys are diving all over the court. Everybody, against Pittsburgh, everybody's diving all over everything. And then you've got guys standing around watching the ball roll out of bounds. And I don't want to pick on one player, but I still, for the life of me, can't understand what Ian Jackson was doing. When you have an opportunity to get the ball, you get the ball. It's that simple. It's always been that simple. And you see that, and then you hear Seth's comments and buy-in and all this kind of stuff. This program right now, in my mind, having watched it for almost 50 years, older than you guys, is dysfunctional. I almost said a bad word. It's dysfunctional, and there's a reason that people defend Hubert and all that, and I get that. But this is, if you are satisfied with the product on the court, raise your hand. And nobody's going to raise their hand. And then when you see the players, Jeremiah, to Evan's point, checking out on the court, that's something that people aren't used to seeing around here. There have been some bad players. There have been some bad teams, unfortunately. But checking out and completely just letting it roll, that is something different. And that should be the most concerning thing, I think, for the Carolina fan base, Carolina admin. What do you think?
Well, one of the ways that I look at it is if you're looking at, kind of the way the Hubert Davis tenure started out, obviously a lot of times we always bring this up, they kind of saved their season late, end up going to the, to the national championship. The team after that, it was always kind of up in the air. Will they make the tournament? Will they not? Because it did fall off the rails so fast. But I think since they did make the national championship the year before and they had so many of those, got 4 of the 5 starters return, now you're looking at a situation where it's like, all right, these guys, at least things aren't going great, but, they at least have, enough talent, or maybe they, they've seen enough, whatever. Maybe there was that, because if you remember, they were pretty much on that tournament bubble with like a chance to make it all the way up until pretty much the very end. And then the team after that does what they do. This year's team, like, it's already over, basically, as far as a regular season path. I mean, it's probably already over. So I think the sooner that this team got down, because when this team gets down, like, they're just down. Like, I think at the beginning of the year, obviously they would, make these comebacks and things like that. But I think since it got so repetitive and so just continuous of go down 20, go ahead 4, lose by 7, I think since that got so continuous, I'm not going to say that, guys don't try, because I don't believe it's guys not trying. I just think it's like I think Adam was kind of asking this in some of the questions he had the other day. Is like, does it wear on you? Or maybe AJ was asked, like, does it just wear on you? And I feel like it does. Just kind of in thinking about it for myself, I think just with how many losses they've had this year of the same variety, of the same formula, I think it just human nature, like, it can be easy to just, say, what's the point of this, blah, blah, blah. Like that can be easy as human nature. That's not like an expectation we have as, them being on the court, but, you can kind of see that being a thing. So I think what ends up happening is, I think what we see now, kind of to Evan's point, is like several different guys on one roster, but like on different teams, like almost with different agendas. I think they all want to win, but I think they have different ideas and thoughts on the pathway to do so. And you understand, I mean, you have some guys, coming back to North Carolina because, they feel like it's a great situation. You have some guys obviously want to go to the league and, and just generally speaking, all these guys that have these different ideas of different ways to win. And it's just, it hasn't clicked and it hasn't worked. I think last year's team probably was more on if you remember last year when we talked to those guys at Media Day, you had a Cormac Ryan who was on a 2-3 win Notre Dame team as far as ACC play. You had a Harrison Ingram that never made the tournament. Even a Jalen Withers when he was more, kind of in that role player slot, he was on a Louisville team that was terrible. And then you had RJ and Armando miss the play. And then you can kind of go on and on with those guys. They had a unified mindset, I felt like, and I don't know that this team has it. And I think next year, for forward thinking, I think really being critical in the evaluation process, not just of guys that can play, but why the guys want to play. Like, do you want to play for winning the ACC? Do you want to play for making the NCAA tournament? Like, you have to get that elementary with it, I think, in your decision-making process, not just looking at the stars next to a guy's name or whatever the case may be, or how many points they put up. You obviously want to get, really good players. I understand that, but you just need to know that you have, like, everyone is just on the same page, from the coaching staff to the players, from the support staff, everybody. Everyone needs to be unified on the same page of what they want the vision of that team to be. And I don't think everyone is, kind of like Evan was saying, but I don't know that there's like uniformity, when it comes to that, and it's showing up on the court.
Yeah, a couple of interesting chat questions. We're talking with Evan Rogers, Jeremiah Holloway here on press coverage on Inside Carolina's Thursday night live show. Vaughn in the chat asked, do you think the players believe in Coach Hubert Davis? That's a great question. Evan, can I put you on the spot and ask you that question? He asked me.
I'm going to twist it a bit because I don't want to put words or thoughts into the players' mouths. I don't know if they don't trust Hubert. I kind of think they don't trust what they're running offensively or the offensive scheme. So
and losing sucks. So let's keep this in mind too.
Certainly.
Most of these guys have never lost a ton. Jalen Withers, I mean, that was one of the worst Louisville teams in the history of basketball that he played on, those type things. And I also think that's an issue too, because that's a mindset issue. Anyway, losing stinks, but go ahead, Evan.
Yeah, I mean, offensively, I think there is some, I don't know if it's lack of trust. It's just like when you run, and I see someone saying there is no scheme. There is a scheme. It just doesn't work for this roster. And I'll lay it out. I'll give you an example. UNC really, really likes to run, and they ran this last year. They like to run a flare screen. So that's when you've got RJ Davis, or it's usually Ellie Cadeau being the primary ball handler. Say he's dribbling on the left wing extended. You're going to have someone set a flare screen for RJ Davis. So basically, Vin Allen or Jalen Washington sets a screen for RJ Davis to essentially just curl around on the opposite wing, and Elliott's supposed to throw like an over the screen pass to RJ on the other wing. I mean, people have seen them. They ran against Clemson the other night, and it's when Elliott threw the ball out of bounds because RJ kind of got caught in the flare screen. And flare screens can work really well. I mean, they're a great way to set up an open three-pointer on the wing, or if a team overcommits to the three-pointer, you can have the big man dive on a cut. And it worked really, really well last year for UNC because usually the player on a flare screen who was the shooter in that case was Cormac Ryan, who's 6'4", 6'5", and lightning quick release, super quick release. This year it's RJ Davis, and RJ Davis doesn't have a slow release, but he's listed at 6 foot, and he's my height, and I'm not 6 feet tall. So that's a hard pass to make when you're trying to be a player like Elliott and throw kind of like your over the head, over the screen pass to a shooter who's 5'11". And then also last year you had a guy in Armando Bacot setting a screen who, as I think everyone has learned, is one hell of a screener, but he also takes up attention. So the defense has to be aware of his potential dive to the basket off the flare screen. This year, it's Vin Allen Lubin, it's Jalen Washington, players who, we've seen a multitude of illegal screens called them, and defenses don't necessarily have to respect the dive on that flare. And that's just one example. And it goes back to the scheme that Hubert wants to run just doesn't match this roster in the construction it had. I went and looked at KenPom today. In ACC-only games, UNC ranks 14th in the conference in offense of efficiency. Teams that are higher than UNC, Cal Berkeley. I think everyone saw how that Cal offense looked in the Smith Center. Another team higher than UNC offense, which is quite damning, is Miami. And Miami was a team that hadn't won an ACC game until about a week and a half ago. They went on a stretch of losing 17 of 18 games. So that just goes back to say, I think right now, and they're seeing it, especially within this, losing stretch of losing 5 out of 7. When you keep running something you're being told to run or has been implemented since the summer, and I see someone ask based off his personnel, and I think in the summer the idea of this offense could have worked because you thought you had a shooter in K. Tyson that you could stick in the corner to space the offense, and you thought you would get more serviceable play from the big man platoon. I think we can all agree in the summer when everyone realized it was going to be a platoon, people still figured it would be at least serviceable. I would argue the big man platoon hasn't even been that. But when you're running something that you've been, implemented for months now, and it's something you can't change, obviously. I mean, there's 7 games left. There's really only so much you can do. And it doesn't work over and over and over again. You're either not going to run it as much, or when you do run it, you're just going to go through the motions, which I think is what we're seeing a lot now. It's just players going through the motions because they know, well, we've ran this back to November and it hasn't worked with much success. So why should I keep running it to, the fullest extent? So in that light, that's where I think the whole not trusting the offense, I think is definitely a case that we're seeing, especially as of late with this team.
And we've seen when they don't hit shots, they don't play defense either. I mean, the defense is more so than I've seen in a long time. And we've heard former players talk. Justin Jackson talks about it a lot. We've seen find a way to affect the game even if you're not shooting well. We're not seeing a ton of that from this team because they just don't play defense when they're not playing good offense. If they're both going, they look pretty good. We saw that early in the season. We've seen it in stretches. But if offense goes sideways, defense is usually right behind it. I mean, it's a tough ask for this, Jeremiah. One thing it reminds me of, and then I'm going to take an ad break, and then we're going to move on. It reminds me of the first half of the bowl game, going back to the Fenway Bowl. Mm-hmm. You got to have other sport references. Whatever they'd game planned was not going to work. It was not working at all. But at some point, Freddie Kitchens and the offensive staff for the bowl game said, let's try this, something different. And it started working a little bit. Now, granted, the game was over, but it at least gave some guys like Caleb Hood has some positive vibes. You know what I mean? We hadn't seen Caleb Hood get positive, have positive plays since Appalachian State a couple of years ago. But they started making plays because they changed something. And that, for me, to Evan's point and your point earlier, they haven't changed anything. It just there's small tweaks and pivots and all this kind of stuff, but there's been not any wholesale. You can't tell me that the group of the players they have, roster construction be damned, should be as bad as they look all the time. And I think to Evan's point, it's because they're not maximizing the potential. That's another one of those things that is concerning from a coaching standpoint is you've got players, figure out how to make them better and let them do what they do well instead of having them do what they don't do well. Go, Jeremiah.
There was a 7-game stretch where Ian Jackson averaged 22 points a game. And in that stretch, North Carolina was 6-1. In the last 7 games, there's a stretch where Ian Jackson's averaging 7. North Carolina's 2-5. One of those games, he actually had 19, and he actually happened to be scoreless in another win. So 2-5 in that stretch. What that tells me is, this is an example I'm using. Whatever you have to do to get that guy going, that's directly tied to your success, right? So sometimes guys don't make shots. Like against Clemson, I just think he never was really in rhythm. He forced up some shots, just to try to get – he only played 16 minutes and he took 8 shots. So he was trying to get into rhythm. He had some late free throws in the end. I bring that up not to necessarily be like, oh, this is the one thing they got to do. But it's like, well, take your time and really look at, what are the – when is this team at its best, right? I think – if you have a guy like Ian Jackson who, isn't fully, you just got to find ways to, give him the ball. One of those ways could be, and this is tied to defense, but getting out in transition. One of those ways could be just, I don't know, in whatever kind of, plays you design for him. I think he's at his best when he gets downhill. Encourage him to keep going downhill, try to, create some lanes for him through screens and things like that. I know some of this stuff is easier said than done. But man, sometimes I just think about like what, and also like even with some of the starting lineups, I know the other day they changed it and they put Withers in there to try to be a little bit bigger. And, that can't get you, but for so far, just based on how long are you playing, these guys that you're throwing in there, just try something up. Throw James Brown in there, for some more first half minutes, just to have something different. Not necessarily to get a guy to get you 20 points or have a breakout game, but just to throw a team off. I think one thing that could have been huge earlier this year, I know Trimble had to come off the bench because of the injury, but what if you would have tried, bringing one of those mainstay guards off the bench, in the middle and be like, okay, this is like during one of those slides, kind of being like, okay, this is, something you're trying to do here. This is, if you're not, if we're not getting wins, we have to, do something drastic. I think I saw somebody in the chat had the Roy Williams suggestion of like throwing the walk-ons in, in the middle of the game, like whatever.
If anything, that at least signifies to the starters, look, you're not going to keep doing the same stuff. We're not going to keep there's got to be some accountability. That's another issue. When you're losing, there's so many different issues. But anyway, sorry to cut you off.
No, for sure. I think you make a good point. Like, there's a lot of places you can go with it. I think one thing I kind of think back to, and this is just a quick last point for me, and maybe it's a little early to, speculate. But I feel like something about that Florida game, I think there was some sort of change. I know they won some games after that. The UCLA win was after that, but I just remember the post game being very different. Like that was the first time this year where Hubert had more of those extended pauses. Some of the guys were emotional after the game, even talking to some of the guys. They just had a different disappointment at that time. Now, granted, they were 6-5 when that loss happened. It was another one where they came all the way back and had a lead and lost it. And again, they did some good things after that. They had a 4-game win streak, but I don't know. It was something. It seems that something, kind of changed, after that game, from a confidence standpoint. I don't know. But I will say that one just felt a little bit different. And so it'll be interesting to see how they close out this season, how engaged, guys are and everything. But yeah, like I said earlier, sometimes it just seemed like when the team, like when they're down and it's, continue, it just piles, and I feel like for the last 7 games, it's just been piling.
Yeah, and it doesn't seem like anybody, coaching staff, Hubert, players have been able to sort of put their foot down and say it's not going to be this way. We're going to get it correctly. Let's talk about Johnny T-Shirt, johnnyt-shirt.com. Sponsor this show, great friends of Inside Carolina. Go to Johnny T-Shirt, get you some – Evan was talking about it might be snowing next week, so go get you some heavy gear at Johnny T-Shirt, some sweatshirts. One day you can get the T-shirts and actually wear them and not freeze in Chapel Hill. They've got everything you possibly need, and baseball season starts tomorrow on Valentine's Day, and I know they've got some sweet baseball gear at johnnyt-shirt.com or Johnny T-Shirt on East Franklin Street. Also, email Matt at congruityhr.com for your small to mid-sized business assessment. Matt and Darren handle all the financial they do all the heavy lifting so you can make your business grow and go from local to national like they've been able to do. Matt at congruityhr.com for the best service you can get to grow your small to mid-sized business. And it's free if Inside Carolina sent you. National guys pay the bills on the audio version, but we're sticking right here. Let me ask a question to you guys, and going back to what I started with Greg Barnes's article today about the arena. Evan, you're still a student. Jeremiah, you were a student recently. Is having an on-campus arena, is that a big deal? Would that be a big deal for you as a student, or was it that huge? Like, what's the thought process there? Because as an old guy, and I've got 2 at Carolina now that will not be anywhere around when the new arena is built. I think they've liked having an on-campus arena, but is it that big a deal? I'll start with you, Evan, since you're there.
Gosh, you're putting me on the spot.
You don't even go to other sports, but whatever.
I do not speak for all students that go here, all students that are going to come here, or all students that have been here. Personally speaking, I think it is very cool that UNC has an on-campus arena. I think it's good for students who want to get to the games. It's easier. All that is true. I also believe that the student experience at basketball games isn't the best at UNC in terms of seating for students and just general overall experience for students. And if moving to an off-campus location in an arena that would have about 16,000 seats and would provide the opportunity for students to have a closer seat, to have a single student section, I think those trade-offs would be worth it. There are plenty of examples of extremely rich, cultured programs that have off-campus arenas. Kentucky's basketball arena is not on campus. No. Kentucky has one of the best atmospheres in college basketball. So it can be achieved with an off-campus arena. And as long as you have the proper, busing systems in place, I think there actually are some advantages to having the off-campus arena over the on-campus arena. The other thing to consider is, yes, UNC's, the Smith Center is on campus. Everyone knows that. It's also on the furthest south side of campus. I mean, the majority of students do not live on this end of campus. Like, let's not act like the Smith Center is located in the heart of the quad, where it's a 10-minute walk for all students. I mean, if you're a student who lives beyond Rosemary Street, the Smith Center is a 40-minute walk for you. Like, let's not act like it isn't a hike for some students who live within walking distance of campus to walk to the Smith Center. And among other things, I mean, you can see this when you read Greg's article. I am of the nerdy side when it comes to like the revenue, the financial side of things, all those potential benefits that currently aren't possible due to the location that would be possible at a different location. I think it could potentially be a great opportunity for UNC basketball. I think like all change, people are going to, look the other way to it sometimes or not like the idea initially. But I think if you take a step back and kind of consider all the factors in play, I think there could be some good things that could come with an off-campus basketball arena.
Some great points. I mean, I've been to other places. We were talking about this on our group chat. Minnesota was unbelievable with the area they had around their arenas, the streets. They had a light rail, which I've been saying light rail to North Campus or North, wherever, Carolina North, and the arena would be perfect. But they had a light rail back and forth to downtown. You had all these shops and restaurants and everything and apartments around their arenas, the football stadium and all that. Jeremiah, your thoughts here on the on this arena deal? Because I think a lot of people say, oh, it's great to have it on campus. But to Evan's point, there's a trade-off with the experience for students, even if it is, if you live in Hinton James or Aaron House or Craig or whatever, it's an easy walk. But people forget that it is so far down the hill for people on Franklin Street. I saw like 35-minute walk from Franklin Street to the Smith Center, 45-minute walk from Franklin Street to wherever they would put it this time. Your thoughts on the arena deal? On campus, off campus? student experience and all that?
Honestly, when it comes to the location, on campus or off campus, I don't know that I'm not gonna say it doesn't make a difference, but I don't think students, like, even when, we talk about the Smith Center being kind of further from some of these campus buildings. I can't really recall times where I had conversations with people when I was a student and they were like, I would go to this UNC game, but I got to go all the way down to the Smith Center and walk all the way down. Like, people aren't really, like, if they want to go, they're gonna go. You know what I mean? Like, we've been to some arenas that were football or basketball that were off campus, and you had to make more of a drive to it, and people go. I think with UNC being where men's basketball is, probably the primary sport of interest, people are going to come out to that, especially if there's winning. Now, if they're not winning games, I think it's more about if they win games or not, honestly. Like, I don't mean to coach speak it, but, like, I really do believe that, like, when fans disengage, like, they don't go. Like, they, sometimes all you got to do is pay attention to the size of a crowd at a game that you're at, just like, what is the level of buy-in? Now, when it's new, people are going to go regardless because it's new. People like new things. They just do. So, when they're making history, it's like, oh, I was at the new arena in its first year, and I was, I was at this game and I was at that game. Even people like us, oh, I covered the first time North Carolina played in this new, like, people like when things are new, but if they start losing, the interest isn't going to be there. So I do think, but when I look at it though, I think moving to a new arena actually kind of goes in line with just entering a new era, so to speak, because, like, it's obviously been a different, time for, UNC basketball and things like that, and for college athletics in general. So I think them just trying something new, trying something that's more compact. Like Evan said, can you make the fan experience better? Like, can you, where do you put the new, student section? Like, those are things you have to, really consider, and just different ways you can optimize it and things like that. So if they make a change, like I said, people will like the newness of it. I think the key thing is pairing it with a team, a well-resourced team that will win games. And I think, the transition would be fairly smoothless if you were able to do that.
Yeah, take care of itself. Somebody mentioned on the message boards on the thread, and if you're watching this and you haven't read Greg's article and you're not on the premium message boards, this thread is an unbelievable thread about that column. But they mentioned NC State. Oh, they moved to PNC and they stunk. Well, first of all, State stunk before they ever left for the PNC.
PNC is 4 miles from State's campus. Like,
but
you can't compare them. You can't.
No, let me make no. Let me make my point.
This is something that's got me triggered. People have always compared.
No. This is a different point. Listen to my point. Listen. I will get there. Reynolds Coliseum was awesome. To Jeremiah's point, I covered the last Carolina State game in Reynolds Coliseum. Ed Cota and Ronald Curry almost got us all killed in there. Go back and find the video of that game.
Love Reynolds.
Yeah, and it was epic in there. And then covered the first game in PNC, now Lenovo, Carolina State, where Cota hiked the ball between his legs to Haywood, almost got us killed in there. The point being, State was good at the time, and State basketball has not been good. Therefore, their experience, except for the Carolina games, is not very good at PNC because it's off campus and people complain about that. But look at Carter Finley Stadium, which is right beside it. And that place gets on fire, full of students. To Evan's point, students will, or to both y'all's point, students will travel and go if it's worth going to and they have a good experience. And State's figured out how to do that with their off-campus places or whatever. So why does that trigger you, Evan? Why does the State reference trigger you?
Because it's not comparable. I mean, like,
I agree, but my point was Carter Finley still rocks, and it's the same distance away from campus.
It would be a totally different thing because, I mean, yeah, part of it is you have to win. That gets students out. But yeah, I mean, like, PNC is 4 miles away. It's not NC State's building, first and foremost. I mean, it's the Hurricanes.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that hinders that experience or that feeling of it being like a college arena because it's not their arena. I mean, I think if you compare the UNC moving off campus to NC State moving to this PNC, I just think it's a very shallow comparison. And I don't mean to like come off as too blunt. I just think it's totally different comparables. I mean, we're talking about a blue blood program moving to an arena that is, I haven't looked at the full thing on my maps. I mean, it's probably like what, a mile, maybe a mile and a half down MLK versus, a PNC arena that's 4 miles from NC State's campus in Raleigh. We're talking about Raleigh versus Chapel Hill, a college town, and you're not running into much crazy traffic if you're trying to get to that game or the busing system. So I think there's a lot of opportunities that could come from an off-campus arena if you kind of just take a step back and see all the potential, whether it's from a fan experience perspective, a ringing in the new era perspective, or if you're a nerd, the financial perspective. I think there's a lot of opportunity that could come, from a massive shift and a massive change that this program, has never done.
Yeah, and it's all about the money ultimately. And Greg's point, you gotta make up the money somewhere, and the Smith Center, unfortunately, is not doing that with the way it's set up. A couple more minutes here. We're going to get out earliest press coverage. What's next? We talked about Hubert Davis. We talked about the Tar Heels. Talked about new arena. I think the GM discussion has been a fascinating one. I can't really add a lot there. They need one. They needed one like 2 years ago. The women's basketball team has a GM, and we see how that's helped them this year. They got a tight game going on right now, according to the chat. Jeremiah, final thoughts here before we get out of here. Carolina goes to Syracuse. I guess you're going.
Yeah.
Have you ever been to Syracuse?
Went last year. Yeah.
Okay, they did play it there last year. Big arena. That can get cooking if they're good. We'll see how it is on Saturday. But Carolina's thing is they got to figure out how to win at Syracuse. Not an easy place to play for the Tar Heels. Your thoughts on how that goes down?
I mean, shoot, last year's ACC championship team lost there, and that was probably one of the more unique like court storming situations I've been part of, because like the way that arena is set up, it's very different. I don't know. I'll have to go through my pictures and everything and stuff like that. But anyway, this is the part of the year where, more so than the wins and the losses, I'm really interested to see just like what type of dress warmly. It did snow up there last time, and it's supposed to this time too. I'm very interested to see what the approach is as far as the body language, as far as the enthusiasm. Like those are the things like, our guys going to go through the motions, like that. Those are the things I'm going to really pay attention to. Obviously, any player you talk to, or if you talk to Hubert after a game, they're going to say, it's about the next game and we have to try to win everything. But yeah, I mean, with a struggling team that's 14-11, and these guys know, like, they're on the internet, they've seen the way that the tournament shakes out. Like, they know that their tournament hopes are, about, wrapped up. I want to see how they approach the game. And really all the rest of these 7 games, like, how are they going to play? Are they going to, play like there's hope? Are they going to mail it in? Are they going to go through the motions? So, the details of the game, I mean, that's one thing. I don't think anybody in this chat is going to necessarily be happy if they win the game, just based on the way some of the stuff I see on the boards and just the mood, the overall mood. So, I don't think you're going to necessarily – you're not going to turn heads if you win, and everyone's still going to be mad if you lose. So they're – as far as if they win the game or not, it is what it is as far as, I guess, the way it's perceived. But like I said, this game, just like the other ones, and also, like, since this is a game it's a road game, it's in a, you have to travel up north, you got to be in this cold weather. Yeah, I mean, how do these guys respond? I think if it was like the team 2 years ago where the tournament life was still kind of there, like, if you got enough wins, got enough quality wins, you could have made it. But this year's team, since the situation is so different, I mean, yeah, I'll let you know, kind of how everything goes there.
Carolina women in a tough one. Official review going on. I'm probably behind. Former Inside Carolina podcast guest Renaya Kelly just called for a charge that would have been a leading basket, it appears. Evan, you got 30 seconds to tell me what's next for Carolina basketball.
UNC is 7-6 in the ACC right now. They are 6-1 against teams with a winning record in conference play. They are 1-5. Sorry, they're 6-1 against teams with a losing record in conference play, and 1-5 against teams with winning records in conference play. The next 6 games are all against teams who currently have losing records in the ACC. Like Jeremiah, I think it's a good point. I want to see how this team looks body language wise, reaction wise. It's easy to get motivated and amped up for a game at Duke, for a game at Clemson, and this team wasn't motivated. It's hard to get motivated for a game against a Syracuse team that just lost to a really bad Miami team. It's going to be cold. It's going to be gray. You're in a big arena with not a lot of people in it. So I think you're going to quickly see just the mental fortitude of this team, you know, even by the first TV timeout, and kind of how they've reacted and processed, you know, this last week.
Yeah, interesting discussion in the chat. We can do this one next week. NIT buy or sell. I was not happy that they turned down an NIT bid a couple of years ago. I thought it was Bush League a little bit. I mean, you do what you earn. They turned it down. It paid off the next season, though. So we shall see. Jeremiah Evan covering Inside Carolina on the beat with press coverage. What's next? I'll tell you what. NC State comes to the Smith Center next week. That game right there will be one to watch, because if that one goes south, that's a James Madison football game in the making. We shall see what happens. Appreciate it, guys. Shout out Johnny T-Shirt and Congruity. Shout out 250 people that have been in here listening to us talk about it. See you around.